All right, so week 11, learn together. So here's what I've been thinking about. Now that we've been through the section 11, which as I talked about in the video for section 11, the importance of knowing how to write to and read from files. But I got to tell you, now that I've actually done part of Dev 1, I realized the importance of some of those other things that I kind of cast my hand at, and it was really about getting the current directory. So anyway, it's all good. Here's what I want us to do for this Learn Together, okay? So how will you? That's the question mark, right? So now you need to figure out how your Dev 0 will write to and read from a local file to output summary information. And here's where that comes from, is in reviewing the requirements that I've drafted so far. And by the way, I'm doing this in week 9. So by the time you get here, these may have been refined based on your questions, which are really good. That's why I've been trying to get you to think about this. And I don't have the benefit yet of your week 10, which is part of what you're going to give me as far as your thoughts on your Dev 1. But that's okay. So just for this point, right? So you have to get user input somehow, either from the user or using the args, which we haven't really done much with, but is very doable, to where you just pass arguments to the file that you're running, or use an external file. Okay, so I just broke these into bullet points today because I realized that may be hard to kind of wrap your head around. So however you do it, you have to get user input, and then you have to store that input in a file, and then you have to read from that file to generate summary data. Now, at this point, if what you're trying to do is outside and you're doing something else, which a couple of you may be, it's important for you to reach out to me and have a conversation with me about that. So this video and this Learn Together is really going to show you my example as a way to also help you see code that I've written that does this, and also walk through the dev tools and give you an opportunity to actually reason about how you're going to do this. So this is what I'm saying here. I'm going to walk you through mine using the debug tools. And then what I want you to do, and you can think about this as you're looking at my next part, is describe your plan for this requirement for Dev 1, right? For how will you handle the files, right? The writing to and reading from. And then write some code that will help you get started on Dev 1, because that's the idea here, is that by giving you an exercise that actually helps you both focus on, think about, and actually code through some of your Dev 1, hopefully you get a little more head start than you might normally. I don't know. Some of you have been working ahead really well. Okay. So either do your planning, right? Describe your plan in the reply, or create a markdown file in your S11. Then this will be the directory that you'll create. And then in there, if you do reply with your plan, then in there for sure write your code that is a start for your Dev 1. Okay, and then reply to 2 of your fellow student posts with substantive. And I'm going to say this specifically, like replying with thoughtful comments that you've looked at their code and may have questions or comments is what I'm looking for there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip over to VS Code. Okay, and first thing I'm going to do is just run my code, my program, just to show you. And now first I'm going to run it from the command line, which is my normal process, and then I'm going to run it from the debugger, okay, and show you. And really the first time I'm just showing you basic functionality differences, okay. And actually I've been running this, so it should be in there. Okay, so the thing I took out, and you may not remember, but I had where the computer could the code could play itself by generating randoms, but I took that out because I wanted to add this leaderboard. And of course, in my play, I wanted to write to the file. So and if you watch this directory, which by the way, before I jump in here, notice how I have dev, And then under there, I have the old dev 0 and then the dev 1. Okay, and so this is the way I want to see your directories. And even if you're copying some of your dev 0 code into the public to do this work, make sure when you go back and put all your work in this directory here is where I want it. So let's say I was going to play. And one of the things I know I'm going to do, and this is on my to-do list actually, is to change. And I created this to-do list with a markdown file, but I'm going to change the player name to ask for an email address and then use my regular expressions for validating that input. And then I also know I need to implement the try except for the read and write to file. I got to do that. And I'm going to add switch game player functionality. And if I have time, and you'll see this in a minute, I'm going to refactor my saving to just a string, saving strings to a text file, to actually saving a data dictionary and then writing a binary file and reading from it. That's my longer or my bigger goal if I get to it. So for today, right, when you play, you just enter a name and then it gives you an opportunity to play. Now notice what happens over here. As soon as I do select something, it actually creates that, and I'll show you this in a minute in my debug, but it creates, and in this case, I could have created in a subdirectory, and I probably ultimately will, because I think it's good to isolate that data. But all it did is it basically said, it gave the output, but in the file, and you'll see this in a minute when I stop, is that it just wrote the player name and then the outcome. Okay, so I'll just play a couple more times just to, right, just to have a little more data in there, and then I'll stop playing. And this is where I think I'll change either by function or by content, showing that once they stop playing, they either have to give a new email address or something like that. We'll see how far I get. So now I'm going to go ahead and do the leaderboard. Okay. So right now I'm the only one that's played. Okay. And I've won one game. But if you play with different people, so if I play for Jack, right? Jack, let's see if we can get Jack to win a couple. Cool. And then I'll hit stop play. And then I'll do that leaderboard again. Now you can see that Jack's on the leaderboard. He's top on the leaderboard. Now this leaderboard output needs some work, but at least for now, and that was the harder thing, was actually getting this to work. And I'm going to cover how I did this in my actual reply to this discussion, but for this focus, I'm going to actually focus just briefly on how I wrote the file, just so you have that. Okay, so I'll go ahead and end, and then I'm done. Okay, so that's how. Now let's actually walk through my code. Okay, and here's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to switch over to the debug here, clicking here. Right? But before I run this, I actually want to hit a breakpoint. Now in my code, where I'm going to hit this breakpoint is going to be, let me see where it's at. Yeah, up here. So in here, after I determine the outcome, then I'm going to run this. And this is where, you know, when you do your Dev 1 code review, I'll say, right, start me where there's output. But I'm just starting you from the point of which I want to cover the code, but just know that that's what I will say is, okay, set a breakpoint where it makes where you start to interact with the user so we can see and you can walk me through that code. Okay. All right. So now that I have this, I'm going to go ahead and hit run. Okay. Oh, sorry, run and debug. That'd be good. So here, run and debug, it'll ask me the current file. Now, this is important to understand that when you run and debug, you have to be much more explicit about where the files are at. I ran into this first thing. This is why I was saying that whole section 11 where understanding where the current working directory and all that is really important. Okay. So in this case, I'm just going to hit play. Okay, because this breakpoint doesn't get hit until after the first time you run through and determine what the outcome, the result of the game is. So I'll go ahead and hit play, and I'll do demo, right? So now the human's playing. I Probably could change that. Matter of fact, I could change that and make that much more fun, but I'm going to hit rock. Now, here's where I'm hitting my breakpoint, right? So I've run through the code, passing in the player choice, the game choice, and the player itself. Something I did change. I set up some strings, and then what I did here is I just set those string values based on the conditions of what the outcome was. And then at the end, and this is where I made my code more efficient than the last time I wrote it, is I just did this append once. And really the other reason I did that, and by the way, this append is only to the global array that I have. This is actually what we'll write to the file. But so I just rock through this. So again, I'm just going to do a step into, and that part's done. And remember, the great thing about the dev tools is you can see, now that I've executed that line, I can see that that game represents what it represents, right? There is the loss itself, so I can see what is stored up in that global array. But this is the part, and this turned out to be a little easier, and this is why I probably ultimately want to maybe try the other one. Writing to it was easier. Reading from it and doing the leaderboard was a bit more challenging. So I'm going to call a function write to file. Remember, when you're about to see this code, I do need to implement the try except for this because that's part of the requirements for the dev. So I'll go ahead and write to the file. I'll pass in the player and the results. So the player and the results. I'll determine now, actually in this case, I could drop out, but I determined the directory name and the file name. I could have dropped the file name out, but I went ahead and just for now left it in, where I look at the path, the absolute path of the file, and then I split that out to get both the directory name and the file name. And be very clear, when you're running DevTools, if you don't do stuff like this and you're just running from the command line, it will throw an error because it won't know where to find it. And so how I figured it out was running DevTools. And when I got to this place right here and I looked at the directory, I was like, okay, where I was looking at this, it wasn't working because I hadn't told it where that actual file was. Okay, so now all I'm going to do here is step into that, and I'm opening the file. Remember, the first time if you run it, you're giving it a file name. If that file name doesn't exist, it just creates it, and I'm doing it with the A flag, so it appends it. And then right here, I'm going to write lines. I'm going to say gameplay.writeLines, and I'm passing it the player, a space, the result, and a new line. Okay, so I'm going to drop through that, and then I'm going to close the file and go back. Okay, so that's really all I had to do in order to make that work. And then I just return to my gameplay this the resulting message that outputs here in the command line, right? So that's how easy that was, just to write it. And let me just go show you, just by looking in here at that JSON file, okay? Not JSON, which actually that's the other way I actually would like to refactor, is using JSON, because it's the most common type of data exchange file on the web today. But for now, this will work. So you can see that last entry got added into the file. And at least in this case, I've handled the first part of this, which is getting the input from the user and then storing it or the processed data. So I didn't just take what the user gave me. I processed it into a result, and then I stored it in a file. And in this case, I used the text file. So what I will do in my reply, because I usually do a second video, and in this case, in the reply, I'll actually walk you through how I did the leaderboard, because it was a bit more involved and required a little bit more. So what do you need to do here, right? So for this, coming back here, right, I want you to think about, right, because it's really, the more you reason about, think about how you're gonna, what you're gonna write to file, knowing that you're gonna have to get it out, right? The more you kind of think through this, and I'd spent a bit of time just laying and thinking about, because when you think about how you're going to store it, naturally what you're thinking about is how you want to get it out. And I realized there's many ways I could have done it, and I decided what I wanted in my code is the ability to switch users, just have basically a transaction file that I could then run code to give me a leaderboard. So that's why I did it this way. Okay, so now that I walked you through it, I've shown you how to use DevTools. I've shown you how I wrote to just a text file. What I want you to do is think about, right? Think about, reason about. This term reason about gives, because you're really thinking about how is your code going to accomplish this, okay? And just as a reminder, here are the things that I still have left to do. I have not done this yet, right? I'm going to change this. I already talked about that. I'm going to add, for sure I got to do these three things because those are fundamental to the requirements. Okay. And I haven't done them and I need to do them. I focus more on the files for this one because I think the regex stuff should be a little more straightforward. And I say that, who knows when you start doing it, what it is, because I'm going to try to use it in a way that validates the input. And I think it's good when you're doing this to actually give yourself this idea of a markdown file. And if you want to look at it just as a file without the markdown, right? So how I did that, just a list. And actually, I think it'll render better once I put it out on GitHub. Is, just like this. And then as you finish things, you can put an X here and mark them off. But it's good to know, like, here's what I'm doing, here's what I have left to do, and it kind of helps keep you organized as well. Okay, so that's what you need to do. Hopefully this is clear, but I'm giving you the opportunity now that you've seen, again, this is kind of version 0.1 of mine, but at least it works. And again, on my reply is when I will show you how I did the leaderboard, which I think should be a little more fun to go through as well. Okay, so make sure in your reply you do your planning and that you get some code that, gives you a chance to work on this, gives you a chance to give it some pre-thought. The quicker you do this, the better, because as you know, right? This is heading at us. Now, by the time many of you have gotten here, I will have done another blast of email about the sessions and all that, so don't worry about that. And actually, my added functionality here is going to come in the next video where I actually go a little more in how I did the leaderboard because I use some functionality things we haven't seen so far. And in my case, I didn't use any of the libraries outside of the core Python. And let me just show you what I mean by that. So the stuff I imported to, right, this all came out of standard Python. So it's when you actually have to install something that's not in the core Python libraries, that's when you need to think about or actually do the step where you have virtual env, right, the virtual environment. I think that's enough. Hopefully we've covered most of this by now, right? This is nothing new. Regular expressions is probably the new part, but this is really an important one because it is 3 of the requirement steps. Okay, I hope this helps you. Talk to you later.